Good afternoon, Robert. Here we are, 6th of August 2022. The weather's perfect and we're here on the 10th anniversary of the Queen Elizabeth Olympic Park. We did a video before when it opened, and we've been this morning to look at the Olympic Village, now called the East Village, which is behind us. We can see the skyline. And walking around it, I was impressed. You know, compared to many of the housing projects that we've been to look at in London, I'd be much happier living here than in the new projects elsewhere. And we've seen some rich and some poor. I also was thinking as we walked around that it's what you have often said you'd like to see, which is high density, low rise, somewhat in the tradition of Georgian Victorian London, and somewhat in the tradition of Darbon and Dark's high rise, high density, low rise, they used to call it. So, is this what you've always been dreaming for as the model of how future London housing should be?
Not exactly.
Why not? I mean, do you generally agree that the quality is good?
Satisfactory. Okay, it's middle of the road. It's a huge improvement. It's a great success. If you were looking at this site in 2000, 22 years ago, it's a transformation. This was old railway land, locomotive works, factory sites, which had some interest. It had a lovely allotment. It had a traveller's site, you told me, but has been transformed by the 2012 Olympics. And here we could compare it with, say, the Beijing Olympics or the Athens Olympics, where the sites, and the Rio Olympics, where the sites have not been so successfully reused.
When the site was chosen, I think it was 2005, I came to photograph it thinking it'll be interesting to make a comparison of before and after, and I'll try and find my photographs to include in this video. But it certainly is a very different place. What do you think of the layout of the East Village? I mean, do you think it's a village, first of all?
No, it's an estate. It's estate housing, like the West End estates.
So what about the commodity aspect of the scheme?
Not so good. It's car-based. The map that you see at Stratford International Station emphasises the roads. The roads are too wide, unnecessarily wide. The paving is on a concrete base with cement. Which is...
That's firmness.
It's unnecessary firmness. It's profligate firmness, and it's not sustainable. In fact, it's remarkably ungreen. Very little in the way of private gardens that I could see. We couldn't go into the private courtyard gardens. The ground floors are occupied by cars, by car park space. Which is totally unnecessary. In fact, I would wonder whether the roads, it's oversupplied by roads, whether much in the way of roads is necessary, comparing it with, say, Vauban in Freiburg, which is a car-free development.
To answer my own question about the village, it seems to me to have no characteristics in common with an English village. No church, no duck pond, no telephone box. It doesn't look like a village, it doesn't function like a village. It's for one narrow social class, sort of city workers, I suppose, young people and young families, perhaps. On the functional side, the commodity of the outdoor space, the developers say that they've got three categories of open space, which are sort of parkland, like the Central Avenue, which seems very popular and good looking. And they've got these internal courtyards, which we can't really see, but I guess on the shady side, because the buildings are rather high for the proportion. And then they've got balconies, private balcony each. And on this beautiful day, we had a long walk round, and we only saw, I think, 2 people on balconies, because they don't satisfy the criteria that we agreed in the video we made on how to plan and design a good balcony.
I'm concerned also about the tree planting. The tree planting is largely 10 years old in the more established areas, and in 20 or 30 years' time, when the trees are twice the size, the scale of the outdoor spaces is going to reduce dramatically, and I don't think there's effective management. There should have been a lot more use of coppice trees, the avenue tree planting,
Perhaps even bleached.
The avenue tree planting, the plain tree planting is fine, but the informal tree planting is going to have problems.
I think that the parkland, I mean really, I think they should call it a greenway, because that's what it is. Some of it, as I mentioned, well designed and successful. Some of it, like the place they call the Belvedere, it looks all right, but it doesn't seem to meet a social need. I mean, we didn't see any people using it on this lovely hot summer's day.
Also, we saw no climbers on the walls of...
We saw one example of somebody having planted their own climber,
by their front door.
but certainly no design for green living walls. And on the original Olympic development, only cedar roofs, whereas there's a wonderful opportunity to make a sky space. We could have had a great sky park and sky gardens up there. Nothing to be seen there. The firmness. So shall we move on to Venustas? And I'll tell you what I think about that, if you don't mind me speaking before you. I think what it lacks is charm. I mean, the Greek word was charis, which survives in the English word charisma, and it hasn't got that kind of charm. The aesthetic quality it's got is more of a cold formalism than it is the warm charm you associate with the Three Graces sculpture. But what do you think of the aesthetics of the building design?
What architects have this great wish to demonstrate their individuality, and dark brick, pattern brick, with the high-rise, remarkable, crazy shapes, and it would have been better if there'd been more control. A good example would be, say, West End, the estates of the West, the landed estates of the West End, or Nash's villas, where there was very effective development control.
I mean, if you compare the palatial elevations round Regent's Park, actually drawn by Humphrey Repton's son, if you compare them, which are fairy tale, magical, if you compare them with the Junketecture that we're looking at behind us, I know which I prefer.
Junketecture is a bit harsh, but I find it onanistic, to give it a polite word. If one had got a stronger development framework, the use of the one brick or the one range of bricks, or the one finish of windows, it'd have looked far better.
Looking at the scheme as a composition, which is what it is behind us, I think that it's poor. I think they've got the massing wrong. You know, the proportion between built and void, between solid and void, between buildings and what's often called landscape, I don't think it's well done. And I think the trouble may be that they thought about the buildings first, and then, as always, the space between the buildings was not exactly space left over after planning slope, but a secondary consideration. I mean, they had good landscape architects working on the scheme with West 8 and Vogt at the beginning, but it really should have been them who did the initial design, and then the architects built where they thought there should be solids.
Fundamental decisions that were wrong were the wish to provide car parking at ground floor, which has wasted a huge amount of space. Two, the lack of cross ventilation in flats because they're fairly deep. You haven't mentioned the fact that we've not had any rain in London in July and August, and it's a
or June. It's been a very dry summer.
It's been one of the driest summers on record, almost as dry as 1976. And cross ventilation is vital, particularly if you're on a south-facing elevation. The streets are too wide, the footpaths are too wide, the private outdoor space is too small. The token front door.
We saw one of those.
Front garden areas. Sorry. We haven't been into any of the private internal spaces, so can't really critique them. Roof space hasn't been used satisfactorily.
No, it's a wonderful place for a sky park, a sky garden nest. And we saw one street with a cycle lane, and the only cyclists we saw were using the car space because the cycle path wasn't sufficiently well designed.
Examples of good development would be 19th century Barcelona, Amsterdam southeast in the 1920s, traditional block building in Berlin since the 1880s, or indeed in London, the landed estates of the West End.
Yeah.
And indeed, as a modern precedent, in Freiburg, the Vauban development that I've mentioned previously.
I can't help thinking that in calling it the East Village, they weren't actually thinking about English villages. They were thinking about the Lower East Side in New York. I mean, it's not got a Manhattan quality, but it hasn't got a London quality either. And they do refer to London open spaces, and I just can't see it.
Village is a term used by letting agents and development surveyors nowadays. It's their current term.
Well, to sum up, much better than most current housing developments in London, but still not good enough. Do you agree with that?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.